Sulajja Ferodia Motwani, founder and CEO of Kinetic Green and chairperson of the FICCI Green Mobility Committee, joins in right now on the show. Sulajja, good having you. Thanks so much for joining in. I would just a broad macro, Sulajja. We know that the Chinese rare earth ban or unavailability or low availability in the future is going to cause an issue. How big an issue could this be? Because we've heard comments from multiple stakeholders saying that this is a really big red flag.
Right. Well, good afternoon and happy to be on your show. I think you rightly pointed out that this is going to be a fairly severe crisis for the Indian auto sector very soon. It's important to note that currently China accounts for 70% of the global rare earth metals, but also 90% of the global rare earth magnets, which are supplied all over the world. And these magnets are used by auto industry in various components. For EV sector, for example, it's lifeline because the electric motors use the magnets, e-axles require the magnets, but also in the ICE vehicles as well. There is a use of magnets in sensors, in ignition coils, and many other components. So I think that this issue needs to be resolved, failing which auto industry and EV industry will face major production outages beginning as early as middle of June. And the issue therefore has been flagged off by the sector, by the industry to the government as a serious issue.
Now, Sulajja, the problem with this seems to be that it's almost impossible to predict what can happen, because I would presume it's a G2G conversation, a policy move that needs to happen from China's end for a bunch of economies and not just India. So, one, what is it that the trade body might be doing in order to make representations, if you will, and what is it that you hear could be happening at a G2G level for this to happen?
So what China has done, the Ministry of Commerce China has issued a notification in the first week of April, which now requires certain export permits for the exporters of China to export their magnets, which was not the case before. And this is based on the end-use certificate that their importer has to obtain. And this process is extremely long. It requires the importer in India to provide, application, get approved by DGFT, then by Ministry of External Affairs, which is then subsequently to be endorsed by Embassy of China here, and then sent to China for the approvals, where also there are multiple layers of approvals. And as of now, not a single end-use certificate has been approved. So I think it's important to note that since April first week, no magnets have been imported in the country. So therefore, the issue has become chronic. I do believe that it's a geopolitical issue, and it would require negotiations and discussions at a G2G level. If you remember, during COVID, we faced similar issues on the semiconductors, and they were resolved by dialogue between the governments. And I'm hopeful that in this situation, also considering that the auto sector is one of the largest employers and a large part of India's GDP, I think that the issue should get resolved through discussions and bilateral talks. The Indian auto sector has also proposed that they would send a delegation to China to meet with the industry bodies there, as well as to meet with the government decision makers and explain the importance and emphasize the need to restore the commercial relationships as well. I think efforts at various levels will yield fruit is our hope. And we are really trying to work at all levels to promote a solution.
Okay. You did mention earlier in this conversation, this is Harsh here, Sulajja. Earlier in the conversation, you suggested that probably starting the 15th, you'll start to see a drag with regard to production. First off, where are some of these rare earths most required? Is it within the EV space, the ICE space, two-wheeler, four-wheeler? Just give us that perspective.
Of course, for EV, as I said earlier, it's a lifeline because EVs require electric motors, especially the two-wheelers and three-wheelers, where the magnets are an important part of the motor assembly. And even as per government's localization and PMP guidelines, the government of India has permitted import of magnets within the motor while everything else is pretty much localized. So that shows the importance and reliance on this import supply chain for the magnets. So for EVs, we cannot produce EVs without the magnets which go into the motors and the e-axles required for the electric three-wheelers. But that being said, even for the ICE vehicles, as I mentioned before, magnets are required for many components like speedometers, electric water pump, ignition coil, automatic transmission kits, sensors. So there are many areas where these magnets are required. And depending on the stocks in the supply chain in India at different levels, different companies or component makers would start facing serious shortages. It's estimated that these would begin by as early as mid-June, and by July, it's expected that it would lead to very severe production hindrances.
And what are the alternatives at this point, therefore? Are there absolutely any, both domestically as well as outside of China, globally?
So, Minister of Heavy Industries had called a meeting of stakeholders on June 3rd, a couple of days ago, and we stressed the importance also to work towards localization of the critical mineral rare earth materials. In fact, FICCI also, under the leadership of its ex-president, Mr. Shubhrakant Panda, has submitted a report on positioning the rare earth materials, both for the magnets and eventually also for the batteries, and their supply chain, as a strategic sector requiring a lot of P2V, P2P kind of effort for collaboration. And I'm sure that these would yield result in the medium to long term. But given that this will take 3 years or 4 years, I think it is important that we find some kind of a short-term solution. And I think in the short run, resolving the situation with China seems to be the most practical way ahead. There could be certain other countries, from where magnets could be imported. As I said, China controls 90% of the supply chain, so there's a 10% supply chain available. But you can imagine that even vehicles would require to be validated, integrated with these new supply chains, and availability would still be a constraint. So I think we do have to find a solution at a geopolitical level, given that this is an important part of the commercial relationship between the two nations.
Sulaja, just one more question. Is there some moves that Indian companies or India has made in order to start this ecosystem? I hear you, it will take maybe 3 years, 4 years and a lot of planning, but is there something that has started already?
So let me say that the government of India has been emphasizing on Make in India and on what we call the PMP, phase manufacturing roadmap guidelines, to localize, of course, not only EV but entire automotive supply chain. And a lot of moves are in the works. So local component industry has been localizing, building the technologies, and now I think, for example, most of the key components are made locally. The battery cells are going to be made locally beginning as early as 2026. But I do believe that we are at least 2 to 3 years away from this particular area, which is the magnets or the other rare earth, material-based products. So while many actions are in the pipeline, but on this particular area, I would say that we are currently vulnerable, and therefore, we would require a short-term and a long-term solution both.
I'm just reiterating, Sulaja, I think I heard you say, if the current impasse were to continue, we are looking at a serious problem in a couple of months, right? I think I heard you say by July or something there could be some serious issues.
I think so, depending on the supply chain stock positions. I think depending OEM to OEM, the problems could start as early as mid-June, but they would probably reach a severe situation by mid-July, is the estimate that we have as industry body. So we are hopeful that the issue would get addressed through bilateral discussions between the G2G levels, as well as through whatever efforts we are making as an industry and the industry bodies that are putting all their efforts, to address this issue.